Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 2 about constitutional history, and this Lesson 3 is about the colonists who came and settled in the New World and what would become the American colonies that eventually become the United States of America. In this lesson, you'll learn about religious dissidents that came, indentured servants that came, entrepreneurs that came, and criminals that came to settle these colonies, and what they had in common. Let's begin with religious dissidents. Now, what is meant by this is people who were living in Europe, particularly in England, who had a different view of how to practice their religion, how to properly worship God, than what was the generally accepted view. Now, this could mean that they were persecuted personally by the people around them, but it also could mean that they were in trouble with the law, with the laws of the country. In the previous lesson, we talked about the Pilgrims who came over on the Mayflower and settled in the New World, who left England because they were legally required to be members of the Church of England, but they didn't agree with what the Church of England was doing. So these are the kind of people that would uproot themselves and their family and be willing to cross a dangerous ocean and go into a land of savage wilderness in order to start a new life, because it was so important to them to be able to act upon their own conscience that they were willing to take those chances and go into that place. So now think about what then they wanted as they left their home and came to the world. What they wanted was the opportunity to set up their own religious colonies, their own religious communities, where they could live their lives the way that they wanted to, practice their faith the way they wanted to, without interference from the powers back home, particularly the government that was trying to make their way of life and their conscientious choices illegal. The next group of people who came and settled in the New World in these colonies I'll tell you about are indentured servants. Now, indentured servants were people who entered into contracts where someone else would pay their passage to cross the ocean to come to the New World. And in exchange for that, they would work for these people for a certain amount of time, usually at least 3 years, oftentimes as much as 6 or 8 or 9 years they would agree to work. Now, when I say work, it was much more severe than that. As you see illustrated in this picture where these people are coming along with chains around their necks, this was a harsh, potentially, agreement that they entered into. Essentially, they were slaves, but for a specified time period. Why would somebody be willing to do that? Why would you essentially sell yourself into slavery for a specific amount of time, and all you get in exchange for it is transportation across an ocean, again, to a savage and in some ways unknown land, with lots of risks associated with the whole thing and no guaranteed rewards at the end? Why would you be willing to do that? Well, it's because these people saw opportunity in the New World to get something that was impossible to get back home in the feudal societies of Europe. And that was that they could become property owners. See, as I explained in a previous lesson, when Europeans first came to the New World, they brought diseases with them that unfortunately raced ahead of them and wiped out most of the native population. The best modern estimates are that 90% of the Native Americans died because of these diseases, which essentially left the continents of North and South America open for European settlement. So from the point of view of these indentured servants coming, if they could just get to America, once they had worked off their debt for the trip and had become free, each of them could throw an axe over his or her shoulder, go marching off into the woods, start chopping down trees, build a cabin, start planting crops, and together they could build their own prosperous future as landowners. Back in Europe, the only people who owned land were the wealthy. Most of the people were landless peasants. This was a way for them to step up in the world, become members of the middle class, so to speak, and become much more prosperous in life. So it was worth the gamble to come. So if you think about what they wanted to get away from, they wanted to get away from the economic and social and political system that dominated Europe that kept people like them down. And they saw coming to the New World as a way to do that. Okay, the next thing I want to tell you about were entrepreneurs. People who saw coming to the New World as a way to simply make a lot of money. And they would do that by coming and trying to harvest some natural resource that was here, whether it be fish or furs or plants like tobacco or timber or whatever it was. They would start some sort of company to come and gather these things to make money. So their ideal in here was to create a profitable business that would employ other people and allow them to prosper in a way that they couldn't back home in Europe. Again, so much of the society was already locked in there. Wealthy people who owned all the land, who controlled all the resources. Well, this new world opened up opportunities for other people who felt trapped in that system to come and break out and prosper. The next group I want to tell you about are criminals. The state of Georgia was specifically found as a colony for criminals to come and get a new start in life. Now, the kind of criminals that were brought to Georgia weren't necessarily violent criminals. They were debtors. There was sort of a crazy notion back in Europe at the time that if you could not pay your debts, then you should be cast into prison. Now, I say crazy notion because the problem with that is if you're in prison, how are you supposed to earn any money to pay off your debts? But the hope was that your friends and relatives would love you enough that they would pay off your debts to get you out. It oftentimes didn't work that way. Sometimes whole families were left in prison. Children were born and raised in prison as part of these debtor families. And so the founding of Georgia as a British colony was seen as a charitable act, a place that you could bring these debtors and allow them to settle and do some good in the world. Well, that isn't the only example of people that were brought to America to escape a criminal lifestyle. Many of these other people who came that I described earlier, such as the indentured servants and the entrepreneurs and the workers that worked for them, were men. And so they got to the New World and they wanted women. So what sometimes the companies did that had brought these people over is they would go back to Europe, and in working with the local government, they would round up a bunch of prostitutes and tell them, okay, you shouldn't be out here practicing prostitution. You can be thrown in jail for it, or you can get on a ship and come to the New World and become the wives of our men and become upstanding members of the community. And given that choice, they came to America, found husbands, and made a new life. Some of them may be some of your ancestors. So the idea to get from this is that these criminals came to the New World, and what they wanted by coming here is to become upstanding members of society, to get a new start in life, be forgiven their debts or their other crimes, and become productive citizens. And this was an opportunity. The government had condemned them. The government had called them criminals. And this was a way to escape that burden that the government had put upon them. So if you take these groups together that came on their own. Now notice there's another group that I could be talking about that I haven't mentioned. That is slaves, who made up a significant portion of the people in the colonies, but who did not come of their own free will. That's why I'm not talking about them here. I'm talking about people who chose to come to the New World. Well, if you look at them and the reasons they came, you'll see a common theme among them. And that is that they were individualistic go-getters. They are people who were willing to take risks to improve their lives, and they believed that they could do so if they were just given the chance. They didn't need, they didn't want, they didn't expect help from the government. They just wanted the government to leave them alone, let them out of prison, quit enforcing a social order they don't want, quit trying to impose a religion on them that they don't want. Okay, those sorts of things. Stop having business regulations in the way of them making their profits, that sort of stuff. They wanted a place where they could make their own way in the world, and they believed that they could if they were just left alone. So from that, you get the notion that the people who settled here as colonists were naturally classical liberals, as we discussed that ideology previously in this course. They generally just wanted the government to leave them alone and believed they would prosper best if it did. Now let's review this lesson. Who of those people who came in the groups I talked about wanted to practice freedom of belief? Was it religious dissenters? indentured servants, entrepreneurs, or criminals. Of course, it was the religious dissenters who wanted to come and practice their religion as they saw fit. Who wanted to own their own property and saw coming to the world as the great chance to do that and made the work worth the sacrifice to come? Was it the religious dissenters, the indentured servants, the entrepreneurs and businessmen, or the criminals? Well, while entrepreneurs and businessmen certainly, and even criminals may have wanted property, maybe even the religious dissenters did, the people who were really willing to exchange their freedom for a time, then risk greatly their lives, just to have that chance to own property, were the indentured servants. Who wanted economic opportunity? Religious dissenters, indentured servants, entrepreneurs, or criminals? Again, while everyone in this group may have wanted that, the ones that particularly wanted were the entrepreneurs or the businessmen who wanted to create their own profit-generating businesses. And then finally, who wanted physical freedom? Religious dissenters, indentured servants, entrepreneurs, or criminals? Now again, any of these people, potentially, depending on what they did, could end up imprisoned. But there are people who started out in prison without physical freedom and gained up coming to America, and those were the criminals. Finally, last, what was the common attitude among these various groups? Were they all religious zealots? Did they believe in communal responsibilities? Did they have conservative politics? Or were they classical liberals? The answer is they are classical liberals. They generally wanted to be free from government rather than expect government to take care of them. Those are the kind of people that founded the United States of America eventually. And that explains one of the great differences between the United States of America and Europe, is that the people who came and found this country generally believed in a government that would leave them alone to do their own thing. And so Americans to this day tend to believe in smaller government, doing less for them than do the people back in Europe who stayed behind. All right, that is it for this lesson. The next lesson will be lesson 4 from Unit 2 about political life in the colonies.